Hi, everyone, and a warm welcome to another episode of the Talk Room series of podcasts. In this episode, we examine the question of how to be your best self. We do that by examining mental health and well-being and how this applies to people's daily lives. For those people who've yet to see any of our previous podcasts, I'd like to introduce my co-presenter, Wendy. Wendy is a fully accredited cognitive behavioural psychotherapist and EMDR therapist as well. She's been in private practice and working in the field of mental health and well-being for well over 35 years now.
Thank you so much, Ian. And to introduce you, you are a senior accredited National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society member and also the founder of Hope Therapy and Counselling Services. So a warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Wendy. So today we're going to look at the subject of imagery rescripting, a really fascinating subject. But can you just start by telling us what it actually means, Wendy?
Certainly, Ian. So imagery rescripting, or sometimes IR for short, it's a very powerful technique. It's used often in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is sometimes referred to as CBT for short. So this IR technique helps clients change the meaning and the emotional impact of distressing memories or mental images. Instead of just talking about past experiences, IR actively transforms them by guiding the client to reimagine the scene in which they feel more safer, they feel more empowered, and also a sense of more self-compassion. It's particularly effective in tackling deeply ingrained emotional patterns that keep people stuck in such distressing emotions such as fear, shame, or even self-criticism.
That's really interesting, Wendy. So can you just say a little more about what conditions can imagery rescripting, IR, be used for?
Yes, certainly, Ian. So imagery rescripting can be used across a range of psychological difficulties, particularly involving people who've got traumatic or just distressing memories. So research has shown it can be helpful for post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD for short, by enabling the actually traumatic memories to be re-experienced in a different way. It can help with social anxiety disorder, and this helps to change or modify negative self-images or memories of having past social failures. It can also help with depression by addressing early experiences that have sort of contributed to depression. Say, for example, if a person's been rejected or has been in a situation when they've been heavily criticized or they feel helpless. Another condition it can help with is obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD for short. And this is really, really useful for people who have like what is called intrusive imagery or distressing memory. So an image they can't really get rid of. It sort of stays in their brain all the time. It's really, really good for that. It can also help people with eating disorders. Again, often in eating disorders, there's a real self-critical or shame-based part that the person really experiences. So it can really actually transform that. Personality disorders, especially with people who've got early trauma and attachment difficulties there, and also even phobias by re-scripting past experiences that reinforce the fear of whatever it is they're fearful of. So those are some examples there.
Fascinating. And I wonder whether you can just say a little bit about the evidence base that sits behind this area.
Yes, certainly, Ian. So there has been substantial research in the CBT world about exploring how imagery plays a role in mental health difficulties, particularly in areas of anxiety and social phobia. So the evidence suggests that research has helped refine these techniques that modify negative self-imagery. And that's a key feature of people who suffer from social anxiety. And there's also been a number of studies, clinical trials, research on how imagery relates to the way we remember events. And the way we remember events can be very negatively influenced about how we see ourselves and our identity. So, for example, if we were bullied at school, we have a very strong memory of that, and then therefore we believe, oh, we're useless or we're stupid because we were bullied at school. So that's some examples there.
Okay. And how do you go about using it? How do you go about using this IR with actual clients?
Okay, so just to sort of summarize some key points there. So the first thing is it can be quite a structured process, and that's actually quite important that it's sort of done in certain steps. So the first thing would be to obviously develop a rapport with the client and to set all those things up first of all. So that's all like a given. But if you're actually working with distressing memory, first thing to do would be to identify the distressing image or memory that they actually want to work on, and to choose a past event that causes some distress. So there's an element of control by the client as to which one they actually want to choose to work on. And then the actual therapist encourages the client to describe it in a lot of detail. And this is really, really important in the process, and actually to use all the sensory awareness. So to actually, the client is therefore encouraged to visualize the scene very vividly, focusing on the sensory details, what they see, what they hear, what they feel, what they smell, for example, all those sensory ideas. Okay. And the next step is also to get the client to step into the image that they may be asked to observe or relive the memory from their own perspective. And then the next thing, which is really important, is to re-script the scene. Now, this is where the therapist guides the client in actually altering the memory. Some examples of this is by introducing a helpful figure. So that could be if it's a childhood memory, it could be the client's sense of self as they are now, their own actually adult self. Or another idea is they can introduce a compassionate person, somebody they think is on themselves, who they trust, who's sort of very, very much on their side. You can be very creative. You could even have a superhero coming in there. You have Superman or whoever you want to have there. And the idea is this person comes in to help the client to feel protected or comforted or actually challenge what's happening there. And then the next stage is to reprocess the new meaning. So what I mean by this is that from step 4, the client then has got a new meaning, a new version of the image. It feels more different and more empowering. So imagine the superhero coming in and rescuing this person, and protecting them would be an example. And the final step is actually practicing and reinforcing this new meaning. So it actually requires a lot of repetition just to build and to strengthen those new emotional associations. So that gives a good idea of how it works.
That's absolutely fascinating, Wendy. I wonder, just to help people better understand it, whether you can give a practical example of how it works actually within a therapeutic setting.
Yes, certainly, Ian. Yes, I can. I think it would be really helpful to give a practical example. Obviously, due to confidentiality, this is not a true case, but it's an example of how it might work. So we have a client, I'm just going to call her Sarah, uh, and she struggles now with social anxiety. But one of the reasons she struggles with social anxiety that she has a recurring distressing memory from school where she was laughed at for giving a wrong answer in class. And I'm sure most of us can identify with that scenario. So the first thing is I would say to Sarah, can you bring a memory where you felt really self-conscious and anxious in social situations. So again, we're assuming she has sort of social anxiety there, and it's a situation where she felt socially anxious. And Sarah might reply, yes, I remember when I was in school and I answered a question wrong. The teacher asked me a question and I got it wrong. And I also remember that the whole class laughed at me, and I just felt so incredibly stupid. So the next step, step two, would be vividly recalling the scene. So I would say something like, okay, Sarah, let's take a moment to visualize that scene. So just imagine you're back in that classroom. What do you see? So Sarah might say something like, I'm standing up in class. I can see my classmates looking at me. Some of them are laughing. Others are whispering. I feel my face is burning. So I might say, good. So now what do you hear? Sarah might say, the teacher is saying, not quite right, Sarah. And then I hear these awful giggles, all the classroom all giggling at me. And I might ask them, well, so what did you feel in your body? And Sarah might say, tight chest, just like I want to disappear. My stomach feels really knotted. So the next step is introducing the rescripting of the event. So I might say something like, okay, Sarah, now let's just imagine you've done really well so far. Lots of encouragement because that's quite a difficult thing to do. But now let's just imagine something different about the scenario. So, for example, I want you to imagine the adult version of you, you now today, the strong, compassionate Sarah of today, walked into that classroom. Can you see her? So Sarah might say, yes, I see her. She looks confident. So I might say, great. So what does this adult Sarah do? So Sarah imagines. So the adult Sarah, she stands next to me. She puts a hand on my shoulder and she says, it's okay. Everyone gets things wrong sometimes. It doesn't mean you're stupid. So I might say, how do you feel seeing your adult self supporting you in this scene? And Sarah hopefully would say something like calmer, like it wasn't as bad as I remember. The next step, reinforce a new meaning. So I might say something like, okay, Sarah, now let's make it even stronger. Let's imagine the teacher says something different like, Sarah, that's a really good try. You're really thinking in the right direction. And instead of laughing, your classmates are nodding. Yeah, maybe one of them says, yeah, I thought the same thing. So Sarah then imagines that and then she says, yeah, that does feel really different. Like I'm not stupid. I've just made a mistake. So I might say, exactly. Now, can you just let that new image settle into your mind? Let's replace it with the old one. And hopefully Sarah would say, yes, that feels much better. And then the final step, closing, reinforcing a new image. So I might say, whenever the memory pops up against Sarah, I want you to bring up this new version instead, the one where you feel supported, where making mistakes is okay. How does that sound? And Sarah hopefully will reply something, yes, I can do that. It already feels less painful. And the idea is she would continue to practice that and reinforce that new image to help her feel better about the past.
That's really interesting. And I guess I'm curious to understand a little bit more about how the process is actually working. Can you just say a little bit more about that?
Yes, certainly, Ian. So, um, what happens is with emotional memories, Sarah's brain has stored that original memory into her brain, and it's associated with very strong emotions of negative experience such as shame and fear. So, by actually retelling the story, rescripting it in a compassionate way, it's the emotional impact of the original memory weakens. And then by practicing the new image over time, again and again and again, it just rewires her response to similar situations in the future. So she's sort of rewiring her brain, is the key there. Okay, can I just give you another example? Because
Yeah, please
hopefully it will
do.
help you to understand a little better. Yeah. Okay. So This one is from a client who suffers from PTSD, and the one of the distressing memories is from a childhood trauma. A classic one that people could relate to is maybe an emotionally abusive parent. And again, this is not breaking any confidentiality things, and I've sort of changed the names and everything like that. But I'm going to call this client Imran. Okay. So in this situation, again, the first step would be to identify the distressing image. So Imran, can you bring to mind a memory from childhood that still feels painful in the here and now today? And Imran might say, for example, yes, my dad used to yell at me when I made mistakes. I remember one particular example when I just simply spilled a drink and he really lost it. He really, really got very, very angry with me. So the next step would be vividly recalling the scene. Okay, so Imran, let's imagine you're back there for a moment. Can you describe what's happening? So Imran might say something like, yeah, okay, I'm about 6 years old. I've noticed I've knocked over my drink at dinner. And my dad just stands up really, really tall. And he slams his hand on the table. He's shouting at me at full pelt. I can really hear the words and the anger in his tone of voice. And my mum is just silent. And I just actually freeze on the spot. I'm so scared. I'm just like frozen. So I might say something like, well, what's your little 6-year-old self thinking and feeling? An example, I might say, I just feel I'm useless. I ruin everything and I just want to disappear. So the next step is introducing the rescripting. Okay. So Imran, let's now bring your strong adult self into the scene. The Imran of today, strong, self-assured, confident. Imagine he now walks into that dining room. What would Imran do, the adult Imran do? So Imran might say, okay, I imagine him stepping between me and my dad. My Imran adult self looks at my dad and says, stop. He's just a child. This is not okay. Okay, good, good. How does the little Imran react? He looks up at me, confused but relieved. No one has ever stood up for him before. Okay, good. So what would you like to say to him? He's not useless. He's just a kid, and it wasn't his fault. And then the next step is reinforcing the new meaning. Okay, so let's shift this scene even further. Imagine instead of your dad reacting in anger, he takes a deep breath and says, it's okay, accidents happen. Let's clean it up together. How does that feel? Imran says, I can't really imagine him saying that. But if he had, I wouldn't have been so scared all the time. So I might say, yeah, that's completely valid. It's really understandable. But can you let the new version of the memory settle in? The one where little Imran is protected and cared for. So Imran might reply, yes, I think so. I like the idea of my adult self being there for me. So the final step, closing and reinforcing the negative image. So this memory has been carrying the belief that you're useless. But now we've rewritten it to show that you deserve kindness and safety. Can you bring up this new version whenever the old one resurfaces? And Imran says, yes, it feels different already. It all feels lighter. So how does this work? So this time Imran's brain has stored the original memory as a very deep trauma where he felt absolutely frozen and powerless. And anytime anybody would shout at him now, he would probably freeze the same way as he froze when he was 6. It's sort of like a flashback. But if you rescript it with his adult self protecting him, the brain reprocesses the memory with this new empowering meaning. And even though it didn't happen, he can still imagine his dad apologizing and clearing up together. And over time, this technique should reduce the emotional connection to this memory. The emotional connection should get less, and he should feel more calm and more empowered.
Again, thank you so much for that, Wendy. That's really, really interesting. I guess I'm wondering whether there are times when IR shouldn't be used.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Ian, because it is, as you can see, just going back to those memories can be actually quite a big thing to ask clients. First of all, and as I said before, it's really important to do the preparation work of the trust and rapport and the assessment before you do this. But the research would suggest that it's not good to use if a client dissociates. So sometimes what happens when people have got complex trauma, they feel they sort of go off and don't feel present. They sort of go off into their own world. So if that's happening, that's not a good time to do imagery work like this. If actually the memory is too overwhelming, if the client is too concerned to talk about the memory, it's best to actually work on stabilization techniques first, such as grounding or deep breathing first. Another research suggests that if the memory is not clear or it's fragmented, and that can actually happen as part of trauma as well. So some people might struggle to access their memories vividly enough for IR to be effective. And sometimes clients just simply aren't ready to do the work. They may resist changing their perspective, especially if they've had these sort of trauma narratives for a very long time and they're quite entrenched. But you can offer them different techniques as well. So, as I said before, grounding techniques, sort of being in the here and now, ways to regulate their emotions, gradual exposure to maybe lesser traumatic events is another idea. There's lots of different things they can do before they go to the rescripting.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Wendy. That's really fascinating. So if people have listened to today's podcast and they want to reach out for professional help, if they feel it's time, what should they do next? What are next steps for them?
Well, if anybody's interested in learning more about how these techniques can help you, you can contact me on my website. It's wendycastellino.com. And offering a particular service now about using imagery in a certain way, like vision boards. So sometimes you can actually use a new version and actually put it on a visual display so that it really reinforces the new version as well. And I can help you with that. So that is something if people want to know a little bit more at, then contact me at wendycastellino.com. And what about you, Ian? How do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so we have a range of counsellors and therapists within the Hope Therapy team. We have people that work with a range of different presentations, including trauma, people that are CBT based as well as others. People can reach out to us at www.hopefulminds.co.uk. That's www.hopefulminds.co.uk. Our contact details are all up there, along with a range of free resources that people are very welcome to take a look at. We offer free consultations, so if people just want to talk through options in a very unpressurized way, they're very welcome to reach out. So really just for me to thank you for today, Wendy. It's been an absolutely fascinating subject once again. So thank you very much. And thank you to everybody for listening and watching us as well. So thank you to each of you.
Thank you for listening, and thank you, Ian.